Welcome, my name is Lloyd Burnard. I'm the sports editor at News 24. Very fortunate to be joined today by former Springbok coach, current Supersport analyst, and most importantly, News 24 sports rugby columnist, Nick Mallett. Thank you for joining us today, Nick.
No, it's a pleasure, Lloyd.
We're here to discuss something that doesn't fit into any three of those categories, though. Nick's out with a new book, a lovely little pocket guide entitled Insights into the Rugby World Cup. That is News 24's Book of the Month. Congratulations, Nick.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy about that, but thank you too for your help with it. I mean, it was I wouldn't have managed it on my own, so it was really good getting your input and your help with it, and it was a lot of fun working with you. So I'm glad it's come out. I'm glad it's come out in time, and hopefully there are enough good stories in there for even a non-rugby supporter to enjoy.
Yeah, I think what it does nicely is set up, Rugby World Cup 2023 for everybody. I think you can be somebody who doesn't necessarily, know the ins and outs of the Boks five, but you can read this book and kind of get put into a very comfortable place of what to expect heading into the tournament. Your passion for the game, resonates throughout the book, and it starts in '95 where you open with what I think is a lovely little tribute to Jonah Lomu, the late Jonah Lomu, and his contribution to global rugby and World Cup rugby, and recalling your memories of 1995 and how you were in the stadium that day when he ran through England in a lovely little chapter. Just speak to that a little bit and how in '95 this product was, born and what it's become today.
Well, rugby was already a sport that was attracting, huge crowds. In that time, I think it was probably not quite the Six Nations yet. '95, I'm not sure when Italy came in. Around about that time, Italy was involved in the Six Nations, but there'd be full stadiums when the Springboks got back into international rugby and played full stadiums. You saw for the that rugby had the potential to be a professional sport, but it needed a star. It needed a Tiger Woods. It needed a Shaquille O'Neal. Someone like that. Someone who really captured the imagination for people who've never seen the game, and said, "This is incredible. We've never seen." And Jonah Lomu was that person. He was able to, in those games he played in the '95 World Cup, he was able to transcend the sport. Like no one else had ever done before. It has always been a collective game, rugby, and it depends on the intricate understanding of a front row and a second row and a hooker and the lock jumping. But here was a guy who could change a game, given the ball with not a lot of space, and that guy could run through 3 or 4 people with ease. And it was interesting that it was seeing that performance against England, where he scored a try from 40 meters out. An absolutely sensational try that got the interest of Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch, who was involved obviously with the Packer got professional cricket going, but Murdoch wanted to get professional rugby going. And he wasn't a rugby supporter. But he just said, "Wow, we've got to. This guy deserves to be paid for doing something like that." Yeah. And essentially, that's what it is. These guys players were performing incredibly. They were attracting crowds. They were getting huge television audiences, and they weren't getting paid. And that doesn't make sense. As soon as you can provide entertainment, then you deserve to be paid for it. And Jonah Lomu sort of broke through the glass ceiling of amateurism, if in a funny way. I think a lot of rugby players can thank him in the same way as a lot of golfers can thank Tiger Woods for earning as much as they do today. Rugby players can say thank you to Jonah for bringing the attention of the business world to rugby and the attractiveness that it has for television audiences.
And set up the Rugby World Cup really into what it is today, which is the blockbuster product of the sport, and a beautiful walk down memory lane of yours to 1999, where you had your own experience with the Springboks at the Rugby World Cup, the pride of leading your team into battle at a Rugby World Cup, and then also the devastation of what happens of getting knocked out of a Rugby World Cup semi-final. What was it like revisiting that tournament and your own experience of living a World Cup?
It's strange, I've been shown a couple of times that Larkham drop goal, but it's a game I haven't ever gone through again. It's just too hurtful, it's too painful. I remember thinking, that we'd fought our way into that position. We'd done really well against England with Yanni de Beer drop goals, got into this semi-final against clearly we were the two best teams at that tournament, proven by the fact that Australia went on to beat France by 30 odd points, and we went on to beat New Zealand in the 3rd and 4th place. So we were in we were in a position then of in my mind, that was the final. If we could win this game, I thought the next week was going to be easier than that. And we punched toe to toe with them right up until extra time. First rugby knockout game that we had gone into extra time, and we went up by 3 points. They came back, and then the drop goal went over. It's only 10 minutes both sides, and to have something ripped away from you when you're that close is devastating, because you've put so much into it, and you understand what it means to a rugby mad country like South Africa. You understand there are people at home who are desperate for good news, and there's no doubt that sport is good news in South Africa. And it was a really tough year for South Africa, because Australia put us out of the Cricket World Cup, and we were knocked out by Australia in the Rugby World Cup as well. We had the run out between Klusener and was it Donald, I think it was, and then in ours it was Larkham's drop goal. He's never kicked one again in his life. So it was a tough moment, but it doesn't take away the pride I had of being the coach of the Springboks. We'd had a fantastic run from 97 to 98, end of 98, and we tried our best. It wasn't as though anyone didn't give 100%. It just sometimes you're just not on the right side of a freak of occurrence, and that was one of them.
You're right about the Springbok machine at the Rugby World Cup, and how, regardless of what form South Africa's in going into a World Cup, they always seem to be there at the business end, and they are. I mean, they've always gotten out of the groups, always quarterfinals at the very least. This time around, though, there's a feeling that 2023 could be the most open World Cup that we've seen yet. It's the rise of the North, the way the Northern Hemisphere's closed the gap. But it's also the draw, and the way the draws, brought a whole lot of teams who wouldn't necessarily be in play into play and into semi-final contention. Would you agree that this is the most open Rugby World Cup yet?
Yeah, with no doubt. I think for two different reasons. On our side, top 5 teams playing each other, which means that 3 will get knocked out before the semi-finals, just because one gets knocked out before the quarterfinals rather, in the pool stages, and that's in our pool. We've got obviously Ireland is number 1 in the world. We are number 4, and Scotland's number 5. Now one of us won't get through, so that's already an incredibly tough pool. And Tonga might have something to say as well as the 4th. It looks pretty solid that France and New Zealand will get out of the Pool B, but when we have to play each other in the quarterfinals, that will leave 3 of the top 5 best sides in the world not in the semi-finals. So that's one side of things, makes it very, very hard for us. On the other side of the draw, it opens it up so much more, because suddenly it's 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th in the world, who are far easier to beat now if you're 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th. So Georgia has a very good chance of beating Wales, and Argentina is probably the favourites. They've already beaten England at Twickenham, they've beaten New Zealand in New Zealand, they've beaten Australia away, and they very nearly beat South Africa this last weekend. So they are probably the favourites in their group, although everyone in England won't agree with that. They think traditionally England should go through. Traditionally Australia should go through, but they can't buy a win at the moment. Wales are appalling. So between Wales and Australia, and suddenly you get Georgia and Fiji, who could spring a big surprise there, and maybe one of Australia and Wales don't get through. Maybe England doesn't get through because Japan suddenly comes in and throws a spanner in the works. So there are a lot of banana skins on that side of the draw, and on our side of the draw there are Rugby Cup finals every second weekend. It opens up with France against New Zealand. I mean, that could be the World Cup final. In fact, they could play each other in the opening game. When we play Ireland, that's like a World Cup final. When we play the semi-finals, the quarterfinals, they are like World Cup finals. So on our side of the draw, it's huge intensity and difficult games. And the other side of the draw, weaker teams, but the pools are much more fluid and more difficult to select who's going to get through.
The Springboks, in preparations to Rugby World Cup now, just recently a couple of little wobbles. But you would expect, with the warm-up games to come in the coming weeks, by the time that opening clash against Ireland, is it Scotland?
Scotland.
By the time that opening clash against Scotland comes around, you would expect the Boks to be primed and ready and title contenders again?
There's no doubt. The way that South Africa play requires an intensity and a mental sort of superhuman effort, if you like to call it. You can't raise yourself to that level every weekend. It's just not possible. We've got our game plan, which is generally to dominate the set pieces. We do generally have a territorial kicking game, and we also have a very, very solid defensive pattern. But you can only raise yourself to that heightened level of intensity occasionally. You can't always be at 100%. And so when we aren't at 100%, South Africa, we can be countered quite easily, as we have been by New Zealand in New Zealand, and also by Argentina this last weekend. But I know by the time we get to the World Cup, there's a lift of 20% per player in intensity for South Africa. And that makes a massive difference, because if you are that much more aggressive in the ball carry, you're that much more potent in defense, you're chasing that much harder for our box kicks, and you're more desperate in terms of turning ball over on the ground, all the physicality that we're so good at just gets heightened in a World Cup game. So suddenly, we might have been, not at our best in the warm-up games, but the moment it counts, we're very hard to beat. We're a side that's very, very difficult to beat. So the difference is, when you play New Zealand might be a little bit off in terms of their physicality, but they're so skillful. They all of their players make such good decisions on the ball that they can still score 4 or 5 tries, even though they're not quite at the right position physically. With us, we've made poor handling errors last weekend and against New Zealand.
Yeah.
Now, funny enough, when you concentrate, when you're really in the moment, you don't make those mistakes. And I don't think we're going to go into, and we can't take 3 kickoffs, 5 yards from the line. I don't think we're going to get a lock dropping the ball like Ori did, or Frans Malherbe dropping the ball, or Faf knocking it from a line out.
Yeah.
We saw Billy Leroux knocking the ball and looking up. Those sort of mistakes, you just don't, you're concentrating so hard it doesn't happen. So take away those mistakes, now suddenly we're a different side. We're not a side based on skill as much as we are a side based on physicality. So we need that physicality and that intensity, and that comes with a World Cup game.
One of the big talking points around South Africa heading to the tournament is around Captaincy and his fitness, and there's obviously been some struggles getting him fit. So it looks like he will be fit, but the match fitness will be a concern, I guess, for the coaches going in.
Yeah.
There's a chapter where you talk about the relationship between coach and captain and how crucial that is to any World Cup campaign. Yeah. You speak about your own experiences in '99 and the relationship you had with Uist after a big decision on Gary Teichmann. Yeah. But the common thread is that to win a World Cup, every coach has a strong relationship with his captain. Every captain has a strong relationship with the group of players.
Exactly.
You speak about that leadership. If the Boks go into this World Cup without Siya Kolisi, how concerning is that for that chain between coach and captain and players?
Well, it depends on whether he's on the field or off. He's going to go to the World Cup. There's no question. I actually saw him, funny enough, on Sunday after this game. He told me he's 3 weeks ahead of schedule. So if they thought he was already going to be right for the World Cup, he's 3 weeks ahead of that decision. So I'm pretty confident that he is going to he'll get there anyway, but he'll get there as a player. Because there are 2 ways of taking him. You take him as the 33rd player, as the team and group leader, because he's got that much. He would be the mentor, if you like, for whoever's captaining the team. So if it's Dwayne, or if it was Pollard, or if it's Lukhanyo Am, there are lots of leaders. But having someone like Siya Kolisi with his arm around him and being there at all lunches and dinners would be immense for South Africa. If he's on the field, it's much better. Obviously, it's much better. And the great thing about him, his relationship with Rassie is incredibly tight, and more importantly, the refs respect him tremendously. So, you wanting to win a World Cup, you've got to have the referee on your side. You've got to have your captain who understands how to address them during moments of difficulty. And Siya has learned so much in the last 4 years since captaining the World Cup in 2019, where he was probably an inexperienced captain, but he's no longer an inexperienced captain. He's a very experienced captain. And so having him is vital, but we'll have him either as a mentor or as a player. And if he's a mentor, I do think someone like Dwayne will be able to carry through that. It's a captaincy style that isn't I'm right, everyone bloody listen to me.
Yeah.
It's one which garners information from everyone and then comes to a decision.
Yeah.
So it's very democratic. Dwayne also will ask, Pollard will ask, Willie will ask, Bongi, whoever's in the front row, how's it going? What should we do? Scrum down here? Should we kick for the corner? Is it a driving maul? They won't be just saying go for poles. They'll be discussing it amongst the leadership group. And I think having Sia there is very, very important. But I do think we've got a good experience even underneath him if he doesn't make it.
You mentioned the respect that referees have for Sia Kolisi. Refereeing huge in every test match, huge at every World Cup. Will be critical once again. How confident are you that A, the Springboks will be disciplined enough in the big moments, and that B, they will get those decisions going their way, that they have the respect of the referees in those big moments? I know it's a concern of yours going in.
It is a concern of mine for off the field, things that have happened off the field. I think on the field we are disciplined. I think we do scrum correctly. I think our driving maul is set up correctly. I think the players are very aware of being offsides or not offsides from a box kick. We stay behind the last man's feet. The coaches are very, very good at coaching our team to play within the laws. It is unfortunately the feeling that the rest of the world has about South Africa that can count against us. When I say the feeling is that, the challenges that have been made to World Rugby through the Lions Tour and post the Lions Tour, I've noticed referees be really tough on South Africa in the last year or so. And I'm just hoping by the time it gets to the World Cup that they will have said, okay, we've taught them a lesson, now we're going to referee fairly. And I don't say biased, because that's you calling someone a cheat, and I think that you can't do that. But when I say fairly, you can be extremely fair by finding fault with one team. You'll find the mistake, but you're only looking at one team. You're not looking at both teams, and that's what the referee has to do. He's got to be even-handed at looking at whoever our opponents are and South Africa. I get the impression sometimes that the referee's eye is more on us at the moment, and I think because they're irritated with the challenges that have been made to World Rugby in the last few years.
Nick, we don't know what Rassie Erasmus' future holds with South African rugby on 2025, but we know that 2023 and the World Cup at France will be Jacques Nienaber's last year. Yeah. It is the end of an era, the Rassie Jacques era of South African rugby, and everything they've contributed to Springbok rugby since 2018, the World Cup triumph in 2019. Do you think their legacy is defined by what happens in 2023? And just speak to that partnership, Rassie and Jacques, and what they've given SA Rugby.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think they already have a legacy on South African rugby. If you win a World Cup, you're only one of three coaches who's ever done it. You've got Kitch Christie and Jake White and Rassie Erasmus and Jacques together. Rassie was the head coach. They've always coached together, those two, right from Free State days, the Stormers, Munster, came back and did the Boks for these 6 years, and they've been absolutely outstanding in every job that they've done. Really, an incredible coaching partnership. Different personalities, but they combine so well together. And it's going to be interesting to see for both of them, how their careers develop post 2023. I've spoken about the difficulty of the draw, and so this year, we've beaten the British Lions under incredibly difficult circumstances. Now we're preparing a team for this World Cup. We have to beat the fifth best team, the fourth best, the third best team, second best team, and the best team, plus a semi-finalist, wherever that comes from. So we are, we've really, to win this World Cup, we'll have to be outstanding. They are outstanding, but we've got bumps on the road, I think, there that will be difficult to get over. And so I wouldn't like to say that they will be judged on this alone. They'll be judged on their coaching career, and so far it's been incredibly good. So I think that Jacques has made a decision probably to give himself a chance to develop his own personality without Rassie, because there's no doubt in South Africa, Rassie is a more extrovert personality. He's more in the papers. He's more charismatic in the sense that he doesn't mind chatting, and the players will talk about him. So Jacques is a little bit more introverted, and so this is an opportunity for him to make a reputation without. Whenever they win, people say, well, it's Rassie and Jacques, but when they lose, it's only Jacques. That's a little bit unfair. They're together all the time, until they separate. And so they're both responsible for wins, and they're both responsible if the team loses. You can't just blame one and not the other. Now the Jock's going, he's got a great job at Leinster and he'll do a fantastic job. What interests me is how South African rugby are going to play on without Jock. There's going to be appointment, presumably, of another head coach, with Rassie certainly playing a mentoring role, doing what he does, which is involved. He's involved in the coaching, and teams and tactics have to be signed off with him as director of rugby. So I would be very surprised if it was anyone outside the present group of coaches.
Yeah.
They've built up such trust amongst each other and such understanding that, as Wandile Stick or perhaps a Dion Davids, those two guys spring to mind as people who could step into the head coaching role and work very closely with Rassie for the following 2 years. But, begs the question, what happens after 2025? Will Rassie want to then coach again by himself, or will he be happy just being director of rugby and keeping on this mentoring role for another 6 years? He'll have been there then for 12 years, which is, he's not directly with the players, but it's a very long time to be in one job, especially a rugby job. So it's quite fascinating. But my view is that they've already made their mark on South African rugby, and what this will be a Herculean effort, climbing Everest to win this World Cup. That is how difficult it is.
Yeah.
So really, if they win this, they are already probably the best coaching pair, and Rassie probably the best coach South Africa's ever had.
Yeah.
If they win that, they'll go down as unquestionably the best.
Yeah. As you say, a Herculean effort. It doesn't get tougher than this. The Boks in the past, maybe some of the World Cup wins, 07, it's always those neutrals that say, but you missed the All Blacks and you missed the Swans and those ones.
Yeah.
And but this time around, if the Boks win, they have to do absolutely everything.
Exactly.
The question is, can they? Looking at it now, looking at where the Boks are now, looking at the competition, in your mind, does South Africa have enough to win this Rugby World Cup in France? And outside of them, who are your front runners for the title?
We do. We've got the coaching staff, and we've got the players, and we've got the depth to win this World Cup. Whether we've got the momentum and the goodwill of World Rugby referees is a question I put out there. I think that's the difficulty. So there's no problem with the way we can beat any team in the world with a fair crack of the whip. We've just got to get a fair refereeing performance. And an example of that is Garcia's refereeing us against New Zealand in the opening game of the 2019 World Cup, and Garcia's refereeing us in the final. He refereed the laws in the final. He refereed what he felt like in the first game. So the same referee can give you a poor performance, and then he can give you an outstanding performance, because it was pointed out that you have to referee a side that collapses the scrum. You can't say play on from that. You have to penalise a side that takes out your lifter. You have to do that. And so that's the problem we have. It might be just one game. It might be the quarterfinal against New Zealand or against France, and suddenly we find the referee doesn't have such a good game, and we're knocked out of that tournament. Because I do believe that we can beat Scotland. I do believe we can beat Ireland, mainly because of our physicality and the intensity we will bring to those two games. I'm not sure that those two sides can manage that. I think Ireland has the best playing pattern, but against a rush defence and physical ball carriers, no mistakes, coming short and hard at Sexton at 37 years old, he's going to have a very unpleasant afternoon. So I think we can get through that at top of that pool. But then we're playing New Zealand and France, and that is the bump I'm talking in the road. New Zealand are playing outstanding rugby again. That coaching change has made a massive difference to them. They're playing very physical. Their scrum is so much better. Their line out is so much better. Their attack is so much more direct than it was, and they're getting the results from it. And France, 18 out of 19 games they've won. They're playing at home. They're desperate for a Northern Hemisphere side to win the World Cup. So we will go in as massive underdogs in that quarterfinal. Those two teams, France and New Zealand, I would say have a very good chance of getting to the final, as do we, and as do Ireland. But now we're going to get knocked out. Two of those are going to get knocked out, which will leave two standing. So that's going to be hard. On the other side of the draw, I think whoever wins our quarterfinal will beat the people who are in the other side of the draw in the semi-final. Yeah. So say, for example, we are playing against New Zealand. We don't perform well. New Zealand win that game. France play against Ireland. France beat Ireland. France will play Wales or Australia, and whichever it is, and the other one is Argentina in the semi-final. And I think both will be strong enough to beat them, and they'll go through and play each other. So our side of the draw, I think, will get to the final.
Yeah.
In my view, that's I mean, it's easy to say because they're the favourites, but I just look at the strengths of those teams compared with the issues that those other teams have on the other side of the draw. And I think in a semi-final, you're not going to get through if you don't have all the strengths of France, South Africa, New Zealand, and Ireland. So there, you know, our game in the quarterfinal is like our final. Get through that, we will get to the final.
There you have it. Thanks very much, Nick. Your predictions and insights into the Rugby World Cup. Nick Mallett's insights into the Rugby World Cup in all bookstores around the country now. You can grab a copy. Well done again, Nick. It was a pleasure working with you. Really enjoyed it. A very fun process. And hope it all goes well. Wishing you all the best.
If you look on the back, you'll see a picture of me praying that my predictions come true.
A lot can change. A lot can change. Thanks very much. That's News 24 wrapping up. Cheers.